Chapter 1. The Unforeseen Voyage. It was a morning of vivid blue skies and a gentle breeze as the Johnson family set sail on their long-anticipated voyage. The Father John had been planning this trip for months, meticulously preparing their sturdy ship for the adventure ahead. His wife, Martha, was an experienced sailor herself, having grown up on the coast, and their 4 sons, Robert, Peter, Matthew, and little Sam, shared their parents' love for the sea. The day was as perfect as anyone could have wished for. The seagulls were calling high above the shimmering waves, and the sun was casting warm, inviting rays upon their faces. The family felt a sense of joy and anticipation as they waved goodbye to the bustling port, the town growing smaller in the distance as they ventured into the open sea. As the afternoon rolled in, however, the once calm sea began to churn. The sky turned an ominous shade of gray, and the wind, which was once a gentle companion, began to howl. The air was charged with a sudden chill that sent shivers down their spines. Despite their experience and skills, John and Martha couldn't hide their anxiety. The weather was changing rapidly, and it was clear that they were heading into a storm far worse than any they had encountered before. They had instructed their sons to secure themselves below deck, hoping to shield them from the raging tempest. The waves grew monstrous, tossing their ship like a toy boat. The heavens roared with thunder, and bolts of lightning split the sky, illuminating the terror-stricken faces of the family. They held on to each other, their hearts pounding in unison with the crashing waves. As the storm intensified, John and Martha fought bravely against the raging sea, steering their ship and trying to keep it afloat. It was a battle they were losing. The once sturdy ship groaned under the relentless assault of the storm, water flooding the decks and pouring into the lower cabins. Despite the overwhelming fear, the family clung onto each other and their hope. This voyage that was meant to be their greatest adventure had turned into their worst nightmare. But even amidst the chaos, they had each other. Little did they know, their adventure was only just beginning. As the storm grew wilder, their ship was pushed further away from familiar waters into the unknown. Their lives were about to change in ways they could never have imagined. When the storm finally subsided, the sun timidly peeked through the clouds, casting a melancholic light on the aftermath of the tempest. The once proud ship was now a wreck, scattered debris floating on the water's surface, serving as a harsh reminder of the night's events. John, Martha, and their sons found themselves washed up on an unfamiliar shore, the taste of salt on their lips and the scent of seaweed filling their noses. Drenched, cold, and exhausted, they took a moment to catch their breaths, their hearts still pounding from the terror of the storm. As they slowly looked around, the reality of their situation started to sink in. They were stranded on an uninhabitable tropical island, surrounded by an endless expanse of sea. Tall palm trees swayed gently in the breeze, and vibrant exotic birds called to each other from the thick canopy of the jungle, oblivious to the family's plight. Their ship was destroyed, their supplies lost to the sea. They had no way of knowing where they were or if anyone would come to their rescue. The weight of the situation pressed down on them like a heavy stone, but they knew they couldn't succumb to despair. They were alive, they were together, and they had to survive. Mustering their strength, they started to explore their new home. The island was teeming with life. Lush greenery extended as far as the eye could see, the vibrant colors of flowers and fruits stark against the emerald leaves. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and unknown plants. The family couldn't help but feel a sense of awe, their fear momentarily forgotten in the face of the island's wild beauty. The rest of the day was a flurry of activity. They worked together to gather what remained from their ship, anything that could be of use. Some pieces of cloth, a couple of utensils, a few tools. It wasn't much, but it was a start. They also discovered a fresh water stream nearby, a small but vital victory. As night began to fall, they made a temporary camp near the beach, using leaves and branches for shelter. The jungle echoed with unfamiliar sounds, making them feel even more alien in this unknown land. They huddled together for warmth and comfort, their first night as castaways stretching ahead, full of uncertainty. They were a family out of their depth, forced to adapt quickly to a life they had never imagined. Yet, they were not defeated. Their spirit was strong, their resolve unbroken. As they looked at the star-filled sky, they knew they had a long road ahead. Their voyage was far from over. It had just taken an unexpected turn. Their survival journey on the deserted island had only just begun. Chapter 2. Initial Challenges. The break of dawn on the island was a spectacle to behold. The rising sun painted the sky in hues of orange, pink, and gold. It was a stunning sight, but the Johnson family could not afford to be captivated. There was work to be done. The beauty of their surroundings was a stark contrast to their grim situation. They were stranded, far from home, with a day full of daunting tasks ahead. Their first priority was to improve their shelter. The rough structure they had made the previous night had provided little comfort against the chill and the unfamiliar noises of the island. A more sturdy and protective shelter was required, not only for their comfort, but also for their safety. John and Robert, the eldest son, took on the task of gathering sturdy branches and vines from the nearby forest. They carefully chose branches that were both long and strong enough to make the frame of the shelter. Vines were selected to bind the branches together. It was hard work, the tropical heat making them sweat, and their hands aching from the effort. However, they pushed on, knowing that their survival depended on it. Martha, Peter, and Matthew were in charge of collecting large, broad leaves and smaller twigs. These would serve as the roof and walls of the shelter, providing a barrier against the weather. Little Sam, despite his young age, was eager to help. He was given the important job of gathering smaller leaves and soft moss for their sleeping area. With materials gathered, the family began to construct their shelter. John and Robert built the frame, their hands becoming rough and blistered as they worked. Martha and the other boys wove the smaller twigs and leaves into the frame, creating a semi-solid wall against the elements. It was a slow process, filled with trial and error, but little by little, their shelter began to take shape. As they worked, they discovered the importance of cooperation and clear communication. Each family member had a role to play, and they had to work together like a well-oiled machine to accomplish their task. Mistakes were made, arguments erupted, but they learned from each encounter, becoming more efficient and understanding as the day wore on. By the time the sun started setting, they had a shelter they could take refuge in. It was not perfect, but it was a significant improvement. The walls shielded them from the wind, and the roof provided a barrier against dew. They were exhausted, their bodies sore from the day's work, but looking at their accomplishment, they felt a glimmer of hope. It was their first major challenge on the island, and they had overcome it together. They understood that their survival was not just about physical strength, but also about their ability to work as a team, to adapt, and to never give up, no matter how hard things got. The night came, and they huddled in their new shelter, ready to face whatever the next day would bring. As the golden hues of the sunset faded into the deep blues and purples of twilight, an eerie calm enveloped the island. The familiar sounds of the day gave way to the unknown whispers of the night. As the moonlight filtered through the canopy of leaves overhead, The Johnson family huddled together in their makeshift shelter, the uncertainty of their new situation settling in. The first night on the island was a test of their fortitude. The vibrant symphony of the island's nocturnal creatures filled the air. Every rustle in the bushes, every unfamiliar animal call sent a jolt of fear through them. They were strangers in this wilderness, and the darkness of the night only amplified their apprehension. Despite their exhaustion from the day's labor, sleep was elusive. Little Sam clung to Martha, his big innocent eyes wide open, listening intently to every strange sound. Peter and Matthew tried to put on brave faces, but their apprehension was evident. Robert, usually so full of energy, was quiet, deep in thought. And John, as the head of the family, felt the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. To calm their nerves and to distract from the strange symphony around them, Martha suggested they tell stories. They took turns, weaving tales of brave adventurers and magical creatures, their voices soft in the encompassing darkness. Their stories were not just an attempt to distract from their situation, but also a way to maintain a sense of normality, a connection to their life before the island. Despite their best efforts, their situation's gravity seeped into their storytelling. Their tales gradually shifted, becoming stories of survival, of ordinary people overcoming extraordinary circumstances. They spoke of courage, resilience, and the strength of family, elements they were learning were essential to their survival. As the night wore on, the family fell into an uneasy sleep, their bodies huddled close for warmth and comfort. Their dreams were filled with echoes of their stories, interwoven with the reality of their situation. It was a restless sleep, their minds still coming to terms with their new reality. The first night on the island was a challenge, a stark awakening to their situation. It was filled with uncertainty and fear. But in the midst of that fear, the family found a shared resolve. They understood that they had to adapt, to grow stronger, not just as individuals, but as a family unit. Their first night was a testament to their will to survive, their determination to face whatever challenges the island had in store for them. It was a long, restless night, but it was also their first step towards learning to live in their new home. Chapter 3. The Island Exploration. As the first rays of the morning sun pierced through the leafy roof of their shelter, the Johnson family woke from their fitful sleep. Their bodies were sore from the previous day's work, and their minds still groggy from the anxiety of their first night. But the new day brought a renewed sense of purpose. It was time to explore their new home. After a meager breakfast of fruits they had found nearby, John and Martha discussed their plan. They needed to find a sustainable source of food and fresh water. They also needed to scout the island for any possible dangers and see if they could salvage anything else from their shipwreck. John and Robert decided to trek into the forest in search of food. Armed with sturdy sticks and a rudimentary map drawn in the sand, they set off, their hearts heavy, but their spirits determined. The forest was dense and filled with the sounds of wildlife, its unfamiliarity both fascinating and intimidating. Meanwhile, Martha, Peter, and Matthew decided to walk along the beach, hoping to find anything useful that might have washed up from their wrecked ship. Little Sam, too young to join in the explorations, was given the task of keeping an eye on their camp. Inside the forest, John and Robert tread carefully. The air was humid, filled with the rich scent of earth and vegetation. Strange calls of unknown creatures echoed around them. Every rustle, every snap of a twig set their hearts pounding, but they pushed on. They found an array of unfamiliar fruits and plants, some of which could be edible, but they dared not eat anything without being sure. On the beach, Martha, Peter, and Matthew scanned the sands for anything useful. Their patience was rewarded when they found a couple of metal containers and a tattered blanket. They also found remnants of their ship, pieces of wood, a shattered compass, a torn sail, a sobering reminder of their voyage gone wrong. Their exploration was a mix of apprehension and discovery. Every step they took on the island revealed something new. A new plant, a new animal call, a new landscape. It was like stepping into a different world, a world they needed to understand quickly. As the day wore on, their initial fear was replaced by a growing sense of awe and respect for their new environment. They realized that the island, despite its initial hostility, could provide them with what they needed to survive. They just needed to learn its secrets. Exhausted but accomplished, they returned to their camp at dusk, bringing with them fruits, the salvaged items, and a better understanding of the island. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. They felt a glimmer of hope in their hearts. They had taken their first significant step in learning to survive on the island. Their exploration had just begun, and they were ready to uncover what the island had in store for them. In the warmth of the afternoon sun, the golden sands of the beach sparkled as if hiding treasures within its grains, and in some ways it did. As Martha, Peter, and Matthew continued their quest along the shoreline, they were rewarded with the discovery of several items from their shipwreck. Among the scattered debris, they found a tattered bag containing a small first aid kit, a few canned foods, and a water-resistant torch, items that held immense value in their current situation. There was also a damp but salvageable book on tropical plants that Martha had brought along for leisure reading, which now served as a critical guide to identify edible flora. Their most notable discovery, however, was a wooden crate half buried in the sand. With shared looks of anticipation, they pulled it out and pried it open. Inside were spare ropes, a couple of fishing nets, and a small toolkit, practical items that could significantly aid their survival. The sight of these items, reminders of their past life, brought a mix of emotions. There was a brief surge of sadness, a longing for the comfortable life they had once taken for granted, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of relief and renewed hope. These were more than just random items. They were now their survival tools, their lifeline in this foreign land. While the island was proving to be a land of natural abundance, these relics of their past life could make their journey of survival a little bit easier. The ropes and nets could be used for fishing or setting up traps. The toolkit could help improve their shelter or even aid in creating new tools. And the first aid kit could tend to injuries, which seemed inevitable in their current lifestyle. As they gathered their found treasures, they realized that their survival depended on their ability to repurpose and adapt. Every little item had potential. It all came down to how creatively they could use it. The sun began to dip into the horizon, painting the sky with shades of red and orange. Exhausted but triumphant, they returned to their camp, their arms full of their newfound treasures. The island had tested them, but it had also rewarded them. They knew they were far from understanding all the secrets the island held, but they had made a promising start, and with their newfound treasures, they felt better equipped to face the challenges that lay ahead. Chapter 4: Taming the Wilderness. As the days turned into a week, the Johnson family began to adapt to their new life. The island, initially a source of fear and uncertainty, was slowly becoming a place they could call home. Now it was time to make it more habitable, and that meant using every skill they had. Thankfully, John and Martha, with their experience in farming and housekeeping, were well equipped for this task. John used to manage a small farm back home, and he understood the value of fresh produce. He identified a patch of land near their shelter that got ample sunlight and seemed fertile. Using a sharp stone and a sturdy stick, he created a rudimentary tool to till the soil. He, along with Robert, spent long hours preparing the ground, their bodies gleaming with sweat under the tropical sun. Meanwhile, Martha and the younger boys, using the knowledge from their salvage book, searched for edible plants whose seeds or roots could be cultivated. At the same time, Martha tapped into her housekeeping skills to organize their living space. She created different zones within their shelter for sleeping, cooking, and storage. She used leaves and branches to make basic furniture, a mat to sleep on, a shelf to keep their sparse belongings, and even a lean-to for shade. Even in this wild place, she aimed to create a sense of home for her family. Each day brought new challenges: hostile weather, insects, the hard labor, but the family persevered. They built a fence around their shelter, using strong branches and vines for added protection. They even began a compost pile with food scraps and leaves to enrich their garden soil. Under their parents' guidance, the children learned quickly. They learned to identify edible plants, to help in the garden, to maintain their shelter. They were understanding the value of hard work and the importance of self-sustainability. Their new life was tough and demanding, but it wasn't without its rewards. They could see their progress every day in the growing neatness of their shelter, in the sprouting seeds in their garden, in their increasing familiarity with the island. It was a rough, primitive homestead they were building, but it was their own. By taming a small part of the wilderness, they were not just surviving, but learning to live on the island. And while they still hoped for rescue, they were becoming more comfortable with the idea of staying longer. After all, they were together, they were safe, and they were building a life, however primitive, in their tropical home. With each passing day on the island, the Johnson family faced an array of challenges that tested their limits. But as the old saying goes, necessity is the mother of invention. Forced to live in conditions they had never imagined, they had to rely on their creativity and resourcefulness. One of the first challenges was the need for fire. They needed it for warmth, for cooking, and for keeping wild animals at bay during the nights. After several attempts and shared ideas, they managed to create a spark by striking together flint stones they found near the river and nurtured it into a flame with dry leaves and twigs. It was a cause for celebration, a small victory that meant more than just the fire. It signified their ability to solve problems together. Next was the issue of food storage. The tropical heat made it challenging to store food for long. Inspired by the natural structure of coconut shells, they created a storage pit in the cool earth, providing a somewhat fresher environment for their gathered fruits and caught fish. Then there was the challenge of keeping themselves clean. Understanding the importance of hygiene, especially in their situation, they used ash from their fire and salt from the seawater to make a rudimentary soap. It wasn't ideal, but it was effective, another testament to their ingenuity. Every problem they encountered was met with shared brainstorming and innovative solutions. They learned to weave baskets from palm leaves, to fish using the nets, and some cleverly carved wooden spears, to use seashells as tools and utensils, and even to build a basic rainwater collection system using large leaves and bamboo. They discovered new uses for ordinary items. Their shipwrecked belongings, the natural resources around them, even their own skills, took on new significance. They found themselves doing things they had never done before, learning and growing with every challenge. Life on the island was a constant test, but it was also transforming them. The children, who used to depend on their parents for everything, were now becoming more independent and resourceful. And John and Martha, while worried and stressed, were also proud of how their family was adapting. This part of their journey was about more than survival. It was about innovation, resourcefulness, and the incredible ability of human beings to adapt. It was about learning to overcome, to find solutions, to turn a challenge into an opportunity. In the heart of the wilderness, they were inventing a new way of life. And with every small victory, they were growing stronger, more confident of their ability to face whatever lay ahead. Chapter 5: Survival Skills. In their new island life, the Johnson family had to develop skills that were far removed from their comfortable city lives. Foraging and fishing became critical parts of their survival, and every family member took part in these new learning experiences. The lush tropical environment around them was filled with a variety of plants, fruits, and roots. However, distinguishing between what was edible and what wasn't was a task that required careful study. Martha took the lead here, often aided by